Carrie Davis used to live in this house. He's an old farmer. We used to cut his hay, and he came by. I was walking with my friend Chris, and he's a little skinny man with horn-rimmed glasses. He says, "Where you going, boys? Jump in." We said, "Well, we're just going up the road." And he said, "Jump in. I don't have anything in the trunk but a load of dead bodies." And we kind of went, well, maybe not, maybe not. Well, he ended up in Togus a few days later. He'd had a total nervous breakdown. It's just, and nobody ever talked about it, just life in the country. He had a kid, you talk about that, Tommy Davis. He used to read the paper. He was about 9. He'd read the obituary column and then cross the names out of the telephone book. It's true. This is where I grew up here. This was our house, the old Hood place. It's changed a lot, but that was my bedroom up there, you see. I wrote 2 books that were eventually published in that room. One of them, Rage, which has since been withdrawn from publication because it's about a kid who takes a gun to school and starts shooting his classmates with them. I've written a lot of books about teenagers who are pushed to violent acts. But with Rage, it's almost a blueprint in terms of saying, this is how it could be done. And when it started to happen, particularly, there was a shooting thing in Paducah, Kansas, where 3 kids were killed in a prayer group. And the kid who did it, that book was in his locker. And I said, that's it for me, that book's off the market. Not that they won't find something else, and not that, you know, I don't think that any kid was ever driven to an act of violence by a Metallica record or by a Marilyn Manson CD or by a Stephen King novel, but I do think those things can act as accelerants. And the real question about violence in America, as opposed to, say, the violence in England or Scotland, those places, is you only have to correlate one thing, and that is the difference in the availability of guns. Guns is what it's really about. But there's a whole culture of violence in this country, and I'd be the last person to deny that I'm a part of that, but I'm only a child of my culture.
King's fascination with teenage violence started early. Barely 10 years old, he kept a rather odd scrapbook. It featured 50s America's most notorious serial killer, Charlie Starkweather. Starkweather went on a killing spree in Nebraska and Wyoming with his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, slaying 11 people, including Fugate's mother and father.
In the cattle town of Douglas, Wyoming, end of the trail for a smart aleck gunman. Components of his arsenal are shown here after he was taken into custody. A trail of 11 killings from Lincoln, Nebraska into Wyoming. A 3-day spree until Charles Starkweather, 19, landed behind prison bars.
He was the first outrider of a new age, and serial murder has become a kind of touchstone experience worldwide, not just in America. But as in so many other things, I think that when it comes to serial murder, America does lead the way. But in the 50s, that sort of thing didn't happen, or at least it didn't happen very often. I kept the scrapbook because I wanted to know what to look for and what to avoid. There was a total double zero in that kid's face. I really did see something in there that was inhuman. But I don't mean inhuman like demonic. It was like double zero on a roulette wheel. Nothing. No good, no evil, just whatever there is, you know, somewhere out there between the Milky Way and the next galaxy. He was, you know, hey, the lights are on, but nobody's home. And I had the idea at 10 that if I sort of committed his, not just his face, but his MO to memory, that I could avoid people like that. And I think probably there's a hot circuit somewhere inside. Even at 10, you're the potential of the person that you're going to be. And Yeah, I suppose he called to me. As story material, he called to me. Or there was a voice inside that said, this is the guy, you're going to spend your life writing about this kind of evil. So here's where you start. This is the starting line.
If Starkweather provided the spark which ignited King's fascination with horror, going to school only served to fuel the flames.
I hated school. Anybody who looks back on the years from 14 to 18 with any enjoyment, I don't trust those people, okay? If you liked being a teenager, there's something really wrong with you. That's my view, because I look back on those days with sort of, please, I never want to have to go there again, because I always felt like I was wearing the wrong clothes. I always felt like I had too many spots on my face, and I really didn't have bad acne at all. I was very lucky that way. When I look back on it from the perspective of my middle age, it seems to me that as a kid I was treated no more badly than anybody else, and better than a lot. And yet, at the time, when you're in that situation, I think that for most of us it feels like a nightmare a lot of the time. We feel adolescence is a difficult time.
I guess he was a good kid. I don't recall that there were any disciplinary problems, but in terms of sophistication and savoir-faire, he was a country bumpkin. I know that he had at times been the butt of jokes, and he had been plagued by older friends, older acquaintances, and they regarded him as somebody who was different.
He did have a certain level of frenziness and strangeness. He would always wear these bedroom slippers, no matter what the weather was. Sometimes because of poverty was the reason why he wore them, but he used to just wear them all the time, leave them around the house sometimes. He'd come up and visit, and just leave them there. And sometimes we'd have to, you know, here's your slippers, Steve. He read a lot, and horror classics, comics, strange mysteries. And you'd always see him walking around with a paperback in the back of his jeans. He was always just a little bit eccentric. But it was all right. He was Steve. He was cool.
King's desire to be a writer drove him to the University of Maine, where he read English. But they couldn't really teach him much about becoming a novelist.
He didn't need to learn how to write fiction in some way. He just sort of knew how to make scenes, how to create characters that you could get interested in, and how to maintain a kind of narrative sort of propulsion that that carried you along. He is a serious writer with all the powers of the pop culture kind of magician, and he's managed to combine those two qualities in a way that seems to me unique. I mean, I don't know of anyone else in recent American culture who's done anything like that.
It was at the University of Maine that King met and married his wife, Tabitha. They soon had a baby and inevitably found it difficult to make ends meet.
Steve was very poor. He and Tabby at one point had a trailer that they could barely afford. They really couldn't afford. Steve in college was driving a laundry truck to make some money. He really had to scrape his way through school. Financially, I think he just barely made it. So he and Tabby are completely self-made.
And it was in these difficult circumstances, living in a trailer, with his wife working the night shift in a donut shop, that Carrie, King's first published novel, was written. But it was a book that almost never saw the light of day.
I threw it away, and she fished it out of the wastebasket. And I can remember real clearly that night I was in the bathtub smoking a cigarette, which used to be, I mean, this was the 70s, right? And the bathtub, it was a great setup for a trailer. You had the bathtub, and then you had the toilet right next, so you could just flick your ashes into the toilet and take a bath at the same time and drink a beer. You had all the comforts of home. All you needed was the transistor radio, and you could have the baseball at the same time. You're living in hog heaven. And she came in and she snapped off the radio and she put down the lid of the toilet and she said, "You ought to go on with this."
Carrie tells the story of an outcast high school girl who uses her supernatural powers to take revenge on her classmate tormentors.
She was based on a couple of girls. She was actually a composite. One of the girls made 2 or 3 efforts to break out of that mold of being the low chicken in the pecking order, to always being the goat. And every effort that she made, like to change her look or to be vivacious or to get along with other people, was met with a more savage return of fire from the other kids, mostly from the other girls. Both of those girls are dead. Neither one of them made it out of their 20s. One of them married someone and had a couple of kids, and then apparently what I heard from the old hometown was that in the fit of that postpartum depression, she killed herself. And a lot of times women will use pills to do that, but she killed herself. I can remember somebody saying she killed herself like a man with a shotgun. And the other girl died of epilepsy. Got away from the overpowering mother finally and died of epilepsy.
Fresh from the dustbin, Carrie went on to become his first bestseller and earned the poverty-stricken king a $200,000 advance. King could now afford to become a full-time writer, and he continued to find inspiration for his work in the little threatening things of everyday life.
I came home one day, Joe, my oldest boy, who was then 3 or 4, had done all these cartoons and crayon drawings on this manuscript that I'd been working on. And it was this sweet stuff like "Hello, Daddy," and cards and sons and big tall guys, you know, like kids draw with crayons where the legs look like Daddy Longlegs things. And I was thinking to myself, little son of a bitch, I could kill him. I could kill him. Look at this stuff. And that became the basis of The Shining.
Little pigs, let me come in. Not by the hair on your chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in.
The Shining is about a father who basically wants to eat up his child. And any parent goes through those moments. And to my mind, there's a kind of optimistic side to a book like The Shining, even at its darkest, because if a father is raging at a child, at least that father's there. For me, there was just this vacuum. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad, it was just nothing. It was this empty place.
Here's Johnny.